And then you continue your collaborative development with continuous testing. We will speak more in detail about what continuous testing is and what types of testing that can be done for your mobile application. And then move it towards continuous release and deployment, right? And when we talk about DevOps, deployment is not just for the sake of deploying it, on an isolated system. Most test teams that I know of, I've heard of, would take clean machines and install applications, right? Really? You think the whole world is going to format their OSs before they install your tool? Obviously not. So what are you testing against? An ideal environment is never a real test environment. You have to have a used machine. So I'm a user of many products. I'm not going to clean my OS to go install Microsoft Office or PowerPoint, for instance, right? That's going to be running while all my other software is running. So have live systems, have systems that are akin to your customer environment and install on top of that. So if you're saying, oh, but there's only 512, MB RAM, how will I even run my product on this? So go figure it out. So have you told the customer he needs this? Should you even be making such a bulky product, for instance, right? So those are things that you need to keep an eye out for. So test on customer test beds. If there's a team that's adopted your product and they're willing to share their test bed with you, nothing like it, right? Because those are the people who are finally using your product. Okay, so the three essential ingredients for building apps in what we call the new normal, right? Normal is now changed. And what's the first one? So you need a platform that's going to secure your apps. It's going to be able to manage the life cycle of your app and integrate them into an enterprise environment, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, how can you leverage cloud APIs that can make all of this possible? And the third is synchronize data across multiple devices. So if I go to my laptop, or if I go to my mobile, or if I go to my PC at home, the data across all of this should be in sync, right? So if I've done a search on Google Chrome, for instance, on my mobile, after having logged in with my login, and it's capturing all my preferences, I'd want that reflected even on my PC at home, for instance. So how do you synchronize the data across multiple devices? So here's where cloud APIs bring a breath of life in, right? So you have cloud APIs that can cater to various different things right now. So you have various runtimes. Node.js, for instance, can be offered as a cloud runtime. You have different data management services, MongoDB and so on. You have mobile services, a push service, a Twilio service, all these services that are offered on the cloud right now. You also have web and app application services running on the cloud. And to top it all, you have DevOps-enabled services on the cloud as well. So how would you, for instance, monitor and analyze? So what we talked about there, what happens after you push your application to the App Store? How are you going to monitor your app? There are cloud APIs that help you do that through the monitoring, right? You can have Git hosting that is, hosted as a DevOps service. You can have deployment automation. So once my build is ready, how does someone know they have to go and install it on this device? How do they know which tests have to be run? How do they know, if those have to be tweaked in some way before they run or not? So all of this continuous deployment automation, it helps a lot there. So the service to do that helps you a lot, and that's where cloud comes in again. You also have web IDEs that help you develop your applications and services on the cloud. And you also have agile development practices. So for instance, your source code management systems, your application lifecycle management systems, all those have cloud APIs. So what have we just done? We've supplemented the three ingredients that we spoke about with three others. And what are those? So basically, API management comes in, helps you manage the APIs so that you have consistent use of APIs irrespective of what your system of engagement is. So it could be a PC, it could be a laptop, it could be a mobile. But when you have cloud APIs that are helping you manage the APIs, you ensure you have a consistent, seamless interaction between these various devices. And then you have virtualization and automation, right? So how do you virtualize to ensure that your backend systems are not constraining your current development or testing efforts? How can you bring down setup times? How can you bring up quality and reduce risk? And then you have, of course, DevOps, which we talked about, tying the entire process together. So the three basic ingredients, we supplemented them with three capabilities with the help of the cloud. Now let's say you have a mobile app. What would probably be this? So any of you here mobile app developers, testers? Any of you actually work with mobile apps, Android, maybe Windows-based, iPhone-based? No? Okay. So let me tell you what I've heard or seen some of the organizations do, right? So they have a mobile application and they treat it like any other application, like a desktop or a web application. Functional testing. And how do they do functional testing? Manual device. So I procure devices of all sorts, HTC being the most popular, then I get Samsungs, I get Apple iOS's, actual devices, and I sit and click and tap and do all of that, right? It's still largely manual device testing today. Okay, we've not even gone into the realm of automating that yet, and there's a whole lot to be done there. But let's say you got over all of that, right? We all know automation works. We all know, especially in the case of mobile, where you have so many different challenges, how that works. Okay, the next, did someone say something? Okay. So the next thing is, if I was testing the same application that I developed for multiple devices, now one has a specific form factor, another has a different form factor, and when I load up this app onto the other device, I realize, oh, something doesn't look quite right there. So I'd have to test that. So I have to look for UI anomalies in my application. And how would I do that? Again, manual device. Okay? So that's how functional testing goes today. The next thing you would test with is basically integration. Yeah? You have to make sure that your application is talking to the service it's supposed to be talking, the middle tier, the back end, and all of that. So let's say that's taken care of as well. Then you do end-to-end mobile testing. So here's where multi-channel also comes in. So have you all heard of multi-channel testing? Okay, so multi-channel, let me give you as an example, right? So let's say, okay, I went to my laptop while I was at office and I ordered something on Flipkart, on their website, okay? So I place an order and I put in my, my Google address, I make the payment and all of that. And then I shut down for the day, I close my laptop, I'm on my way home, and I'm always logged in, let's say on my mobile device, on the Flipkart app, and I get a notification saying your shipment is ready to be shipped. Okay? So that was on my mobile app, and simultaneously an SMS was sent to me saying the shipment will be delivered on so and so date. Now I go back home, and on the PC or laptop at home, I log back in again on Flipkart, and maybe I want to do a cancellation or change my order. Okay? How would you test this entire set of things that happen? That's what is called multi-channel, right? I start off on one channel, I move to another channel and another channel and so on. So how would I test the same scenario? It's actually one scenario. I place an order somewhere, my shipment is being shipped, and then I would want to figure out, how to go modify or cancel or acknowledge the shipment or something like that. So that would be your end-to-end mobile testing, right? How would you do something of that sort? So I'm saying here that, this is a standard mobile application testing procedure, and most, if not all of us, are not there yet. But let's assume that we are. So what do mobile testers now need then? When it comes to UI automation or functional automation, you would have to instrument your app some way. So let's say you are doing emulator-driven automated functional testing, where you are not reliant on devices, where you are not reliant on a person actually sitting and doing click to click, right? So you would have to instrument your app in some ways so that you can record actions on it, and then you would be able to play back those actions on multiple devices, right? So that's one of the basic needs. So it has to be device platform agnostic, first of all. If I record on a Samsung, brand something, and if I want to play back on an S5, would that work? Or if I had the same app in terms of UI on iOS as well as Android, can I record on one and play back on another, right? Those are things. It has to be platform and device agnostic. It has to be instrumented, we already spoke about that. And when we talk about platform agnostic, we automatically go to image recognition. It should be able to do some sort of image recognition to say this could probably be the control that they're talking about when it has to play back, right? So that is about mobile UI automation. So what the next? The next is performance testing. So what do you mean by performance? Response times, okay. How well it works. Okay. So let me ask you something. Now, if I'm on my 3G network here, and let's say I try to go to the Flipkart site again, and it took me 15 seconds to load up the home page. How would you do performance testing for something like that? What would you be looking at? The number of users, okay.
The relative measure.
Relative measure of?
Against something functional, like standard.
Against a standard, you're saying benchmark it and try to compare against that, okay? Okay, anything else? How much load it can take, okay? Okay.
Load, stress, volume.
Load, stress and volume, okay? Keep all other apps, that's a very interesting point. So on your mobile, run multiple other apps, load it up and then try to see how this behaves. That's very interesting, yes? Have you thought about the different channels or the different media that's interacting with? What about the protocols? What about the bandwidth? You talked about load and stress, which is basically a server thing. Yes, that's right. How about the device itself? Do you know about response times of the device? What he mentioned was very interesting. Load it up. Context simulation is what you're talking about. See what context it works in. What if my 3G actually dropped in between? How would you test for something like that? Right? So again, context simulation. What if I was in a fast-moving train? Bullet trains having been announced, I can venture out and imagine a little. What if I was in a bullet train and trying to access it? What would happen then? Fast-moving velocity. How does that affect? Very true. Yes, you can do network management, so you can emulate or simulate network conditions to simulate your context. Yes, that's very right. So performance testing is actually moving away from those standard things that we were thinking about, like I mentioned earlier, right? Where you think you're going to be sitting in one place on your laptop or on your device and doing multiple things, and then figuring out if only the server being hit is being affected or not. Probably that was the only point where you talked about performance, right? Stress test the server, load it up, find out where it fails, try to break it. But here, there are so many other factors when it comes to mobile. So how do we do all of that? So context simulation is important. Network simulation is very interesting because if I was on GPRS versus 3G, a lot of places don't have GPRS. And if you were a company that was making applications for use in Africa, for instance, you would have to test GPRS out. How would you test GPRS out? How would you test 3G to Wi-Fi toggling out? How would you do all of that? So these are very interesting questions, right? So let's say you moved on from performance testing, went into service virtualization, you're isolating the front end from the back end, you're trying to compartmentalize, figure out which are the constraints, move those out, replace them with stubs or virtual services, for instance, and then continue with your testing. So service virtualization is another need. And then of course security was one of the sessions that was covered before, right? And I thought that was an eye-opener on what were the things that go into making a mobile application secure. What are the types of testing that you need to cover? That's very important. So let's say you covered all of this. Do you think you're foolproof? Your app would run in the market? It would do excellently well, you get 5 stars on the App Store, yeah? Yeah, we've covered it all, right? No? Do you have any other ideas? What else needs to be tested?
How do you test the emotional side of it?
Very interesting, yeah. So that's where we're coming out, right? So let's do this. So what else should I test, right? Are you testing efficiency? What is efficiency? When I talk about efficiency, are you trying to figure out if I had multiple flows in my application, which 2 flows actually went to the same endpoint, and why did I have 2 flows reaching that endpoint? Are you thinking, if this is my most hit screen, shouldn't I be spending less number of time understanding what's on the screen? How do you figure out intuitiveness, right? So that's satisfaction. What is the quality of your content? Are you making your users cry? Are they saying, oh, this sucks, but I have to use it still? Are they really worried about having to use your app, or do they come joyously and use it? So how do you test these things out? How do you test ease of use? Do I have to read manual after manual? So this is very interesting, right? So I have 2 3-year-olds, I have 2 boys. And I said, okay, sometimes I want to be a little busy doing my own thing, so let me just download some 3-year-old games that they can play on my mobile, right? And I downloaded this game, and I just handed it over to one of them. And they just tap, 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 and after a couple of days, they mastered it, right? They know exactly what to do. And I was thinking, if I go to Facebook, Flipkart for instance today, and I download the app for the first time, it actually gives me pointers of what I should do when. It says 1, it says 2, 3, 4, 5, it gives me a sequence of events. And I said, my 3-year-old wouldn't even be able to read that. So how did they make an app that a 3-year-old could master in 2 days, which I can't do with such a commonly used app like Flipkart, where he has to tell me exactly what is the step of sequence of steps to follow. So I thought the 3-year-old app, that was great usability. So what we call here the knowledge gap, the intended knowledge or the target knowledge, how much do you need to know to use the app with where am I today? The shorter that gap, the easier it is for you to use the app, right? So how can you get that? How do you test these things out? How do you know the knowledge gap is less? How do you know the ease of use is more, and so on? So one of the things you said was emotion, right? And that's another interesting thing to Anand's question earlier on wearables. He had posed that last year. So how do you know the emotions of the user? And that probably comes it will come more and more into play with wearables, right? What are the words I'm using when I'm using that? So are we, mining for words, trying to do sentiment analysis on words, doing some sort of NLP there? What are the facial expressions I have while I'm using that, right? Am I frowning most of the time? I'm confused, I don't know what to do. Or are my eyes, even, censoring the eye movements on your app and figuring out, is the eye going all over the place or is it stuck at a point? Very interesting things to analyze, right? Okay, so let's look at some real world behavior, right? And how can you test to mimic something like this? Now, there was a study done on tablet usages across the day. And they realized that usually when you were commuting, early morning, going to the office, and this was in the US, of course, so it might not be very indicative of how it is here. We are stuck in traffic for a long time. We don't have really time to look at our tablets or our device. But when they're commuting, like